Alright guys, welcome to RC Mojo. This week we're going to do some more to the Scania 770S cab, hopefully getting it fitted to the chassis. Last week we got the mirrors on, the windows in and some of the brightwork fitted. So we're on to the roof in step 57. Just as before, we're not completely following the instructions. You'll note the two-part roof is now very much a one-part roof. I used some plasti weld to make the roof assembly a single part. We'll look into why in a few minutes. Right now we have the corner light lenses to fit. The lenses have surrounds that I've painted matte black on the outside, trying to keep the inside face clean to give the glue a better time. The first step is to very carefully glue the lenses into the surrounds. I'm using a tiny amount of poly cement. We want just enough to stick the lenses in, but not so much it's going to ooze out and make a mess. We also need to be careful not to smear the glue around, but rather drop the lenses in as close to the right spot as we can. Some tweezers do help quite a bit. Do both and then we leave them for a while to harden up. An hour or so will be okay, but the longer the better. While they're drying we can work on the rest of the roof. So next we're on to step 58, the roof light bar. We need 5 M2x5 cap heads, DD7 the bar, 5 DD2s the light pods, and 5 DD6s the clamps. Tamiya also want us to fit some LEDs, or use the fake LEDs, but for the LEDs I'm planning to use, there's a bit of a square peg in a round hole situation, so we'll skip the fake LEDs and the lenses for the time being. To fit the pods, we offer up a DD2 to the front of the bar, lining up the base with the ridges on the back of the bar. Then we hook in a DD6 at the bottom, close it up and thread in a screw. As usual with these little screws, we need to be very careful not to over tighten them. There's not a huge amounts of thread to thread. Then we rinse and repeat 4 times, so we've got an almost complete light bar. In step 59 we've got the roof standoffs, which we won't be needing. I did drill the 4 holes for the roof bar though. The holes are marked on the inside, so you just need to run a 2mm drill bit through them. Also, I glued the chrome strip on the front, but that really wasn't very exciting. Step 60 is the roof aero, which I fitted off camera. It's exactly the same as it was in the initial test build, so we've covered it a few videos ago anyway. Step 61, fitting the roof bar. Also, it covers the 2 plastic strips on the roof, which just glue in. Then there's the sunroof, which I'm not going to fit just yet as I'm going to be needing access to the hole. Plus there's a roof spoiler, which I've obviously already fitted. Okay, the bar. We need 4 2x8 self-tappers, and prior to the painting, the posts on the roof bar were a sliding fit in the holes in the roof, so easy to fit. But now we've got several layers of paint and lacquer, so it's an extremely tight fit. Now we don't want to force it while it's not lined up, so we'll use the screws to pull it down into position. We pop the screws through the roof one at a time and thread them into the posts on the bar just a turn or so it's all lined up. Then we go corner to corner and tighten them a turn or so at a time until the bar is fully seated. Okay, and now we're briefly back to step 57, the corner lights. They've had a while to harden up, so we don't need to worry too much about pulling the lenses from the surrounds. We just need a few spots of poly cement around the edge of the holes. Now I did use a bit too much here, but I'll leave it as trying to wipe it off could make things far worse. The back of the surround has some ridges that line up, so we just drop it in place, make sure it's fully down, repeat with the other one, and then we leave it for the glue to harden up. Sometime later, and we can fit the light buckets. We need 2 M2x4s, 2 2x6 self-tappers, N3 and 4 the buckets, and W1 and 2 the LED clips. To fit, we offer a bucket up behind the lens and thread in one of the M2x4s in the lower hole, which is on the top here because it's upside down. Install it so it's not quite tight, so the bucket can still move around. Then in the upper hole we need the 2x6 and an LED clip. Now it's a bit awkward with the roof in place. I ended up starting the screw by hand, just enough so it won't fall out. Then I got my mini electric screwdriver and flexible drive out. We just need to hold the end bit, pressing it against the screw. Then with the other hand we hold the driver and hit the button. It's a bit fiddly, but it works. Fit both, tighten up the screws, and that's the corner lights done. At least until we need to fit the LEDs. In step 62, Tamiya have us build up the visor, which I've done off camera as it's quite simple. It takes a bit of time waiting for the paint and glue to dry though, so we'll move straight on to step 63, fitting the visor. You need 3 M2x8s, 3 M2 nuts, the cab and the visor. To fit, we need to pop one of the screws up from the inside of the cab in the centre hole. Hold it in place and thread on the nut just a couple of turns. Offer the visor up to the middle mounting tab, which then slots over the screw. Take up the slack with a nut and install the other 2 screws with their nuts, and then gently press the visor towards the cab and nip them all up. Now Tamiya also want us to fit the MFC speaker now too, but first of all we're not using an MFC, and second you might have noticed I've modified the top of the cab. There's a rectangular hole at the front for a micro servo so we can pan an FPV camera if we ever get round to fitting one, and the large hole for the speaker has been extended forward so we've got a bit more space at the back for some of the electronics. To mount everything, I've designed and 3D printed a custom plate. It has the spacers and magnets for the roof, the speaker mount and an electronics mount at the back. It's all largely specific to this setup, so I probably won't be putting it up on Thingiverse, but maybe a simpler version with just the speaker and roof mount might be doable. To fit, we just need to thread in loads of M3 screws. Most of them end up sticking up through the plate for mounting other things. At the front we have another small plate that spaces off the servo, which is just fitted with 2 M3x6s that go through existing holes. With all that in, we can drop the speaker onto the 4 screw threads and install 4 nuts. Now I'm using nylon nuts, but steel nuts with some shakeproof washers would work just as well too. Right at the very front we can drop in an SG90 servo, which would use another couple of M2 screws to fit, but we don't need it just yet, so I'm not going to bother fitting it properly. The speaker is spaced up, so if you're looking through the windscreen straight from the front, it's not going to be visible. A black cone might have been better, but the white ones were about half the price. At the rear, there's a spot for some electronics. Now this is the revised version of the board that's going to be running the WPL E1 tank. It'll manage the lights and sound of the truck, plus a load of other stuff too. It just drops onto the threads and we use some nylon standoffs to attach it. Above it there's going to be some more optional boards for the audio amplifier and a radio to talk to the trailer and a control box. At this point there's still loads of development to do, so we'll come back to it in a future video when we've got it up and running. To fit the roof we need the custom 3D printed magnetic mounts. They just slot in over the posts in the roof for the stock mounts and add some magnets that line up with the magnets in the cab. We just install the 4 screws and we can offer the roof up to the cab. And as you can tell, it's a very positive fit. It's not going to fall off by itself, that's for sure. Alright, step 64, wipers and scuttle. We need U20 and 21, the wipers, and U1, the scuttle. They all just glue on. The only thing to really keep in mind is the scuttle covers up the lower mounting screws for the windscreen, so make sure you're ready to install it. For the wipers, we need to pop some poly cement in the holes at the bottom of the windscreen and press them in. Get the position spot on, then leave them alone to dry. The scuttle is similar. There's 2 posts on the back that line up with holes in the cab. We just need to add some glue in and around the holes, then offer up the scuttle. Now we can put the cab off to the side and leave it for at least half an hour or so before doing anything else with it. Okay, step 65, the dashboard, which I've put together off camera. It's just black paint on the top bit, grey for the bottom, then loads of small stickers. Fairly simple. The tricky bit is getting the stickers in the right spots, but that requires a bit of practice and a steady hand. Okay, so some time has now passed, so we're on to step 66, fitting the dash and the cab mount. We need the dashboard, the G3 cab mount, 2 M3x10s, 4 3x8 self-tappers and 2 flanged M3 nuts. To fit the dash we pop the 2 M3 screws in through the front of the cab. Then we slide the dash over the threads from the inside. Then while holding the screws in we can thread a nut on each of the threads. Then with a screwdriver and a cross wrench we can nip them up. Now they don't need to be super tight, just bottomed out plus a bit extra. The cab mount we've already fitted before we did the paint. Essentially we just offer it up on the inside and thread in the 4 self-tappers. Nip them up and that's job done. Step 67, the upper grille, which is already assembled up to the point that we got to it a few videos ago, with the addition of the paint on the upper panel. The strips are 5, 6 and 3, which have been painted and glued on, and of course there's the chrome Scania logo. Looks pretty good, I think. Step 68, the grille lights and the grab handles. We need 2 2x6 self-tappers, 2 M3 flange nuts, AA 5 and 10 the lenses, N10 and 11 of the buckets, T2 and 3 the chrome strips, and when we get to it, U10 the grab handle. Now the lenses slot into gaps either side of the top section of the grille. There's not much holding them in, so we're going to need some glue. I'm going to try only gluing the lenses on the bottom edge so we can still take the grille apart if we need to later. It should be good enough as it's really not supporting any load. Plus, once the bucket goes on and it's fitted to the chassis, they're going to be fairly well protected. The buckets just sit behind the lenses and get fitted with the 2x6s. We'll take them off again at some point to modify them so we can fit some LEDs, as lights that don't light up really are quite disappointing. Next, the chrome strips go on above the lenses. They need a few spots of poly cement, then we carefully drop the strips into place and nudge the position so they're in just the right spot. The grille can now carefully offer up to the cab so we don't disturb anything, where the grub screws we fitted a few videos ago go through holes in the front. Then on the back we thread on the flange nuts and nip them up. The last bit is to fit the grab handle. It just needs a spot of glue at either end where there's a small pin, and we need a couple of spots in the middle too. Now I found that the fit wasn't quite perfect. With the 2 outer pins located, the centre section would lift from the scuttle just a fraction of a millimetre. It's quite minor, but it needs a little bit of weight in the middle while it dries. I found a couple of AA batteries was just about good enough. Step 69, the seats. Plus, this step also includes the cab and bumper mounts on the front of the chassis, but they've already been fitted. So, all we need are 2 3x8 self-tappers and the seats, which I've glued to their bases. To fit them, we remove the 4 screws attaching the upper plate to the lower plate, offer the seat base up to the spot on the plate and install its screw, same on the other side, and then we can reinstall the upper plate. The only thing to keep in mind is make sure the glue that attaches the seat to the base is well hardened up. When we fit the cab, it's really easy to catch the tops of the seats and knock them off the bases. Step 70, fitting the cab. We need 2 M3x10 cap heads and 2 3mm washers, which we loosely threaded into the mount on the chassis for safekeeping. Okay, now we just offer up the cab and slot the tongue on the chassis into the slot on the back of the cab. Tilt it forward and install the 2 screws with the washers. Gently nip them up and that's the cab on the chassis. And well, it's looking a bit chinless without the bumper, but that'll come together next week. We're really close to having it largely cosmetically complete. There's still lots of electronics and wiring to run, but as far as the appearance, it's almost all there. Right, as always then, thanks for watching. Like if you like, subscribe if you haven't, and leave a comment if there's something on your mind. Bye guys.